Nancy Strickland Chavis is a member of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina and has over 20 years' experience focused on museum education, curation, and administration. She's worked at the Museum of Contemporary Native Art in Santa Fe, New Mexico, the National Museum of American Indian in Washington, D.C., the American Indian Cultural Center and Museum in Oklahoma City. Her current role is the director and curator of the Museum of Southeast American Indian at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. She was the first Lumbee graduate of the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where she earned her bachelor's degree in museum studies. She earned a master's degree from the University of North Carolina at Wilmington and is currently a doctoral student at the Public History program at UNC State, North Carolina State. Nancy's area of research focuses on Southeastern Native peoples and the American colonial experience. I was lucky enough to join Nancy's team last July, and I call it a team because she, like any great coach, encourages and supports us to be the best in our field. Nancy's ties to this land are as close as mine. Her fifth great-grandfather, James Lowry, sold the land to my fifth great-grandfather, James Gilchrist. I have the honor of introducing my friend, Nancy Strickland.
Thank you, Blake. It is a joy to work with Blake every day, and we do some pretty good work together, really incredible work. I'm surprised I do a lot of public speaking, but I'm really nervous. And I know that I'm among friends and family, but this is the first time you've ever had a native speaker to share this story about James Lowry. And of course, James Lowry was the progenitor of all the Lowrys, and even the most infamous and famous Lowry of them all, Henry Berry Lowry. But it's interesting how, as Native peoples, as Lumbee peoples in this community, we've engaged with this space at Mill Prong. There have been drive-bys, there have been stories, there may be some trespassing on my part. But trying to hold space here, trying to honor what existed here and who existed here and what it meant to be on this land in this place, and how lucky we are that we have, in essence, this vestige of a house, right, that you all are fighting for. And I think it'd be interesting how our communities and our people could weigh in and help preserve, because historic sites are so important. As a public historian, we're grateful for these spaces and the efforts of peoples throughout time that have held on to them beyond explanation, have poured so much money and resources into preserving them. And for what, right? A lot of times we can look at land and we'll say, you know what, that old building needs to come down because it's progress. A Walmart should go there. A parking lot should go there. Something that's going to make money. No, exactly, yes. But this is important, and our history and our heritage is important. I see today just this property is just absolutely stunning as a time of new beginnings. And I hope that today, this conversation represents a new beginning for Native people to be able to hold space here at Mill Prong. And in the work that we do, we always ask the question, what does it mean for historic sites to hold space for people? For the people that own the house or that were the original inhabitants of these lands, the people that labored here from all walks of life, white, black, and red. And then how are those stories privileged at these spaces? And how were they privileged? How were they privileged in a way that truly honors and uplifts the people and pays respect to them and doesn't tokenize them, doesn't further marginalize them? And what is the intersectionality of peoples that come to spaces like this, to Mill Prong? And how do we talk about them in an inclusive way and not silo them? How are their stories interwoven together as they are? How does, as a Lowry descendant, my blood represent Scottish descendancy, African American descendancy, Native American descendancy, because of the intersectionality of the colonial experience of this country? What did it mean for the Scottish people to want to come here to start anew after the Battle of Culloden, to find a space that they could live in peace and prosperity? What did it mean for James Lowry to want to come here and move from the northern parts of that Virginia line in North Carolina to start anew and start something fresh? And what does it mean for the people that were forced to come here through African American slavery to work and labor here? And what did this land mean to them? What were their hopes and dreams? And what did it mean as we were all here, descendants of the McEacherns, yes, the Lowrys and the African American communities that would assume those surnames, as we're standing shoulder to shoulder? What did that mean for all of us? And what does it mean to us still here today? Because here we are, honoring this space, fighting to hold on to this house and this land, to repair it, to bring it back to this moment in the 18th century. What does it mean to reclaim space for all peoples in a meaningful way? And how do we do that collectively together? At this moment, I would like to ask, as we're thinking about all of these things and recognizing the blood that's here today, all of James Lowry's descendants to please stand. And here we are, finally, legally standing on this property.
Welcome to
Thank you. That's right. If your ancestors were enslaved on this property, I would like for you to stand and honor the labor and the time and the lives that were here. Thank you. So as we think about what it means to hold space, to work in the arenas of historic preservation, to think about why these stories are important to us and how they resonate with us. And all of you are here because you're history nerds. I don't care what any of you say, you won't be here if you didn't have a passion for it. I guarantee you that all of us could probably rattle off a good amount of genealogy, and I guarantee you our lines are going to cross and intersect and become one and veer off again. Let's think about this land and how it was perhaps a place of dreams, a place of fresh starts, a place of new beginnings, and how that continues to renew, especially during this time of spring. And I've never had a program that I've done that I'm still sitting there writing it, because there's so much to say about this moment that's happening that in essence really is a historic moment that we're all witness to and a part of. So to kind of talk about this land itself, I have the great fortune, my husband and I, to walk around with Richard, who is also a descendant of the families here in this space, and we talked about the archaeology that has been found not only here but throughout. This was formerly Blaine County, Robeson and Hoke County. It goes back to the earliest period, which is the Clovis period, that shows native occupation for close to 10,000 years. That's a long time to have a native presence here. And the archaeology throughout, if we want to talk about space, these counties, man, I needed some backup music. I have no idea. Let's just keep that going. So like, there's a little bit of a Miss Lumbee pageant here, I feel like. But so the archaeology goes back all the way to the Clovis period and goes up through the historic period. And it's interesting to see how native archaeology is also starting to weave in with European archaeology, wares that were brought over from Europe, African American archaeology, and then the fusion together. One of those great examples is colonial ware. I don't know if colonial ware has been found here, but essentially it's dishes and utilitarian pottery that is being taught to African American people and used within their kitchens and also in their homes, and created by them. But then there's some where early Scottish folks and even early English are using this in their own homes, so that historic period of archaeology. So I want to jump to James Lowry, because it's interesting how these times kind of button up really quickly. So when we're looking at the historic period, usually that starts at contact around, for us, we could say about the mid 1500s, and then quickly moves into the 1700s, right? So James Lowry is here in 1769, and I am going to lean into Mary Norman's book. How many of you have read Mary Norman's book? Okay, if you have the family, about the Lowry family, I'm sorry, the Lowry history is the name of the book. So Mary Norman gives a really interesting description of the land here and James Lowry. And if any of you know a little bit, I won't go into the whole Lowry War and all of that, but her husband was murdered by Henry Berry Lowry. For how she describes the Lowrys, it's pretty interesting. I think I would probably have a different, more malice tone about the Lowrys in the writing, but she doesn't, which I think also kind of speaks to who they were in this unique way. But she gives the best description that history has held for us about who James Lowry was. And she says, James Lowry, a tall, well-proportioned, fine-looking, respectable Indian, first settled in Robeson County about the year 1769. This was Bladen County at the time. On the 9th of August, 1769, James Lowry bought a tract of land containing 100 acres from William Fort, to whom it was granted by George II. In 1748, He also entered another tract of land containing 300 acres adjoining the above tract, the grant being signed by George III. On the above-mentioned tracts of land, now owned by the heirs of the late Colonel Archibald McEacherns, that guy, James Lowry first settled. Okay, so here's where we can sit in this perspective and kind of get our bearings, and I'll let you guys wrap your heads around this because my husband and I have been debating on exactly where this is. Okay, so from where we are, about 500 yards below the residence of Colonel McEacherns, in a bend of the swamp is shown a place where James Lowry resided. McFall's Mill on the same swamp are about 3 miles. This swamp was called the Lowry Swamp, after James Lowry, who resided on it. A ford at the time he lived there, A ford at the time he lived there crossed the swamp at his residence. Here he raised livestock, farmed in a small way, and kept a tavern during the Revolutionary War. James Lowry first came to Robeson County, then Bladen County, from Butte County, now Franklin and Warren counties, in the company with Silas Atkins, who immigrated also from Butte County, from this portion that is now called Franklin County. Other families that also came were Thompsons, Kitchens, Coles, Drakes, Moores, Humphreys, Bridgers, and whose descendants still live in Robeson County. She goes on to name kind of the counties that they're carved out from. James Lowry, from whom all the Lowrys in Robeson descend, lived in Franklin County, where he immigrated to Robeson. It was in Franklin County, North Carolina, he was manumitted by his father, James Lowry of Virginia, who, when Virginia became one of the United States, was elected a judge and was ever after known as Judge Lowry. He was of Cavalier stock and characterized by elegance and refinement of manners, tall and commanding in personal appearance, urban, courtly, and genteel in his whole deportment. It was in Franklin County that James Lowry married his wife, whose name was Sarah Kersey, nicknamed Sally Kersey, a half-breed Tuscarora woman, and from this couple, all the Lowrys of Robeson County trace their origin. So that's pretty phenomenal. And I love that she takes time in 2 sections of this writing to compliment how handsome he was, and well proportioned, and genteel, and of good stock. And I'm like, do tell, grandfather. It explains a lot. Look at these handsome gentlemen. Yeah. So, yeah. Excuse me. I do want to say, thank you, that Charles Oxendine's land was also on Back Swamp, and deeds show that his land was right next to James Lowry's land. And we know that children of James and Charles have children. They don't get married. And I feel like,
this is the swamp, right?
yeah, this is the swamp here. And it's interesting because for some reason I kind of feel like they're behind me. But I'm going to say it, you know, James Lowry Jr. had quite the passion for the ladies, and he fathered many different children with Oxidines and Deezes and yeah, that handsome, genteel, well-proportioned tall man probably carried forward. So for the sake of time, I'm kind of jumping through some chapters of this history. But it's important to recognize even through that these people built and lived lives here. They purchased and made land transactions. They were business people, much like we are today, and just, you know, carving out space for themselves, especially during a very early, tumultuous colonial period. And it's in that transition of that colonial period when North Carolina and the other colonies were thinking about what independence looked like. Now here we have an interesting set of politics, because not only did we have loyalists and patriots right in this area where we're talking about, we also had Scottish Tories, and who brought their own set of politics, or kind of were holding on to their own set of politics. And really it was, I think, a legal responsibility that they had to stay loyal to the crown, and that was very important. And so when you have people who are thinking about what their existence was like, they didn't certainly, and I'm just thinking through how this history sort of, how things were back then, didn't want to be accused of treason. They didn't want to be pulled back to Scotland. They had already settled their lives here, and so they needed to stay fiercely loyal to the crown. And then you think about James Lowry and where he came from in Virginia, the sort of, like, I think of it as the seed of patriotism in the colonies, and then what would become the United States, and what a lot of indentured servants were up there too, and what that looked like as they're talking about freedom and independence and the intersectionality of peoples up there, of native and white and black, a lot of indentured servants who really didn't feel a sense of loyalty or belonging to the British crown at all. So when you have those types of politics at play here, James Lowry was a patriot by all intents and purposes. His son, William, fought in the Revolution. He was a strong patriot. And then you had other folks here that were Tories. James Lowry had a thriving business, a tavern. His home was here. He farmed. He was very industrious. And all of a sudden, the politics at hand, just after the American Revolution, is where they start conflicting. They start kind of butting heads. Neighbors, family, those that have been very close to one another, all of a sudden their politics divided them. And eventually, because of this hostility, because of this place, even imagining a beautiful day like this became inhospitable to them, they left. He closed his tavern. He left his home after being here for over 20 years, and he moves down to, almost 20 years, he moves down to what becomes Harper's Ferry in the Pembroke area. He reestablishes a new tavern, becomes known as Harper's Ferry. And the reason being is because the state of North Carolina said if you host people overnight, you have to provide them with entertainment, and he played the mouth harp, which is what you would pluck. So that's how it becomes known as Harper's Ferry. And there he lives out the rest of his days, and he passes away. And in fact, his wife and William, his wife actually applies for a permit to continue to operate the ferry that was in very poor condition. And at this time, it is a proper bridge, but they're still calling it a ferry. So right where the bridge crosses right at Harper's Ferry is the same location as the original bridge was back then. So they're pushed out. They're pushed out of a place that they love. They're pushed out of a place that was part of new beginnings. But it also shows how inherently interwoven their lives were together, and how much they belonged to this place because they were part of the politics that were a part of this place. And that's where the story of the Lowrys ends, here in this footprint. But I can imagine that James Lowry probably came close to here again. Certainly his descendants remember him being here and his family being here. His children, grandchildren, and on still maintain a connection to this place. And what's that one vestige that stood out that says, here's where you were? What is the one piece of survivance that is still here today? This house. He probably laid eyes on this house to say this is where we were. His kids probably certainly did. And many generations come by here, and this is our bearings to know where James Lowry was. Now, I do want to say, as we're talking about politics, to think about this was a native man who, when he came here, was the overseer of roads. He managed the Lowry Road. He collected taxes. He was a businessman. He was well respected. And Charles Oxendine was the same. In fact, the way that I was inducted into the Daughters of the American Revolution was that last little line on the qualifications that says, if your ancestor made a patriotic gesture in the form of land, services, or goods, you can be a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution. And he donated 3 prized head of steer to General Rutherford's unit when he came through, and I suspect that General Rutherford's unit camped on Charles Oxendine's land, which was not too far from where the battle took place near Mill Prong. So when we think about what does it mean to fight for place? What does it mean to fight for humanity? What does it mean to fight for having a sense of belonging, especially in America? And we think of that even today in terms of homelessness. We think of the systemic issues that come from not having a sense of place and belonging, drugs, alcohol. This place was broken into, that was probably related to that. Desperation, right? What does it mean to fight for your home? What does it mean to fight for a place where you can plant your own feet on the ground and feel safe? And that's what these guys were fighting for. So, bear with me in closing. We talk a lot about Henry Berry Lowry. We're very proud of Henry Berry Lowry, not necessarily through his actions, even though I kind of like that rough part of it, not very genteel like his great-grandfather, but I like that grit. That got us a long way. But because of the legacy that it left with us, that as Native peoples, we're going to fight for where we belong. We're going to fight for what's ours and our ancestral lands and our people, and most importantly, the dignity of our people. And so we can see that with James. We can see that with his son William, who bore a scar across his hand for the rest of his life. I think it was from a McNeil guy that he got in a skirmish with, and he would slam his hand down and shout, I was a patriot and I fought for this country, right? And we even see that in his application when he, for his pension, that his wife applied for him shortly after he passed away. And that was a testament to say that he was in the Revolutionary War. I think about 10 people, and it was sort of like the who's who in genealogy of Lumbee people, testified on his behalf that he was in the war. So you see James, you see his son William, you see Alan Lowry, who was murdered in front of his farm by the Home Guard, along with his eldest son William, who was named in honor of his grandfather. And then you see the retaliation of Henry Berry Lowry for justice, for safety, for a sense of place and belonging. So when I talk about this in the museum, I use the analogy of an exploding powder keg. And I like to say that James Lowry was the actual keg itself. He was the vessel. William was the powder that packed inside of that keg. Alan was the fuse that came out. And Henry was the spark that blew it all up. And here we are today. We can see the generations there that were fighting for a sense of place and belonging, to honor history, to honor our ancestry, to honor who we come from, to fight for it. And here we are at this place, collectively together, all of these descendants, all of us with a vested interest in this place, to hold space, to honor the history, and to do better by one another, and honor each other collectively as interwoven communities, as family, and belonging to one another uniquely here at Mill Prong. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
I'm Bob McLeod. I'm president of the Cape Fear Scottish Immigration Memorial Fund. I have 2 of our board members here today, Lloyd McCaskill, and the chairman of our board, Leon Hicks, right here. What we are is we are a nonprofit education organization. Growing up in North Carolina, taking North Carolina history in high school, never heard about the Scottish immigrants really. Heard about the Civil War, antebellum periods, World War II, all of this, but really never heard anything about this. And so it is our mission to educate the public about the vast influence that these immigrants had, the early immigrants, and what they laid down, the foundation that we have built upon. You had the Highland Scots landing in Brunswick Town, Wilmington, coming up to Cape Fear River, the only Europeans that came directly from Europe into North Carolina. You have the Ulster Scots, who came down the Great Wagon Road from Philadelphia, settling the mountains and Piedmont. So between these two groups of Scots, we were really the keystone, I guess, in the settlement of this state. And that needs to be communicated to the public. And what we're trying to do is establish what we call the Scottish Immigration Trek. It'll start down in Brunswick Town. We're working with the state now. She mentioned Reed Wilson. We're talking to his group. We want to build a stone carry there. That is where these Scots immigrants first sighted North America, first time after they left Scotland. That's where it starts. Not many of them stayed around there, though. They came up the river. They came to this wonderful part of the state and settled here. What we are trying to do is create what we call steps in the trek, and that is identify places such as this that have a Scottish connection with the early Scots, and to commemorate it, to publicize it, to put you on the map, if you will. So our two-part mission really is to identify locations and then publicize that. We have a website now that's under development, I'll say, that will list all these steps. People can go there. It'll link to your publication or your website, also give other information. And under that, we would like to have some stories, like we heard now, from the people that actually have a connection here. So we plan to do this throughout the state. And I'm pleased to say that the first plaque given out, the first step, is right here. So Rebecca, I would like to present your organization. With this plaque.
I'll read it. This plaque is presented by the Cape Fear Scottish Immigration Memorial Fund in appreciation to the Mill Prong Preservation Society for its continued efforts to preserve this site and recognizing its significance and importance to the Scottish heritage of North Carolina. Thank you very much. Let me get this photo off. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's certainly an honor. And I think, again, talking about place and putting us on the map, it'll be great to continue to link and have new people learn about it. And then the tentacles kind of spread as far as everything that this site means to everyone. So thank you very much.